Hello. Today I want to talk about the 11th house of the horoscope, but from a specific angle. Very often during consultations, people ask me why they should do to earn a lot of money. Maybe they're doing something wrong, or maybe they need to change the direction and then they will start to earn a lot, become successful and even famous. This is of course an interesting question and a very practical one, but it is framed incorrectly, because it means that something needs to be changed precisely in the activity in order to start receiving a lot of privileges from this activity. In fact, everything that relates to money and income is a parameter of thinking. And in this video, I want to prove astrologically that the question's fundamentally wrong and that it needs to be asked in a different way, and how to do it differently we will see at the end of this video. What does a person with such a question want when he comes to a consultation with an astrologer? He wants to switch to some kind of a new activity which, allegedly, is very beneficial for him, bypassing some moments associated with self-development, self-discipline and so on. Bypass something that is associated with personal settings of consciousness. He thinks that the current activity does not bring a great success and great income only because this is not the right activity for him. This is the biggest misconception, because everything that is associated with money and the 11th house is the sphere of consciousness, which is tightly connected with the 5th house, with our personal characteristics. There is such a simple rule in the horoscope. Each house is opposed to another house, and there is always a connection between these houses. A connection that can be called a connection through opposition or complementarity. If we're talking about the 11th house of the horoscope as the house of income, results, fame, achievements, then of course we must have a well-developed 5th house. The 5th house is the house of education, personal intellectual creativity, including children, as living indicators of the 5th house. Children are the product of our creativity. This is the best that we are capable to create in this life. And in fact, the 11th house, being the house of karma, receiving results, receiving satisfaction, pleasure, nevertheless, first reflects the meanings of the 5th house, the house of dharma, the house which is associated with the personal purpose of a person. And the right thinking is not that we now have some kind of activity that is not bringing a significant income, but we ourselves have no right to this income, because our thinking is stereotyped in such a way that we will never achieve any significant success in any activity. This is how we should reason about it. If you come to an astrologer and think that he will right now tell you the type of activity in which you will succeed, then this is a delusion. Where does this thinking process, which leads us to money, to income, to results, begin in general? And let us begin with what the zodiac is and what a horoscope is from our point of view. The horoscope is a canvas on which our consciousness manifests itself. And we have 12 houses in the Vedic horoscope which fully correspond to the signs of the zodiac. We use an equal houses system, which means that this system reflects our thought process. And in this equal house system, we consider how our thinking is structured, how it is stereotyped, what properties we have for cognition, the abilities for cognizing this world, how our concrete consciousness is conditioned and individualized. And so we look at the horoscope and we see that the 11th house is already the penultimate stage in the evolution of consciousness. And it presupposes achievements, results, satisfaction of fame, and so on. Every person has this stage in his consciousness, in his life. And I want to emphasize here that evolutionarily, this stage stands somewhere very high. In the bright half of the zodiac, in the natural zodiac, this is the Saturnian house. It is ruled by Saturn. Also, Saturn rules the 10th house of the horoscope, and here the first question arises for a person who asks about income. What do you do for society? What kind of socially useful things you do so that your activity can be scaled and useful to many, to the masses of people who are represented in the 11th house. As soon as your activity reaches this level, you will no longer have the question of how to get more income, how to get more recognition, and you will actually be swamped with orders. You will be very popular and so on. But what should be before that? Before that, the 10th house of the horoscope must be well developed. And as I said, the 5th house as well, because it is the place where you will definitely slide back if you have a problem in the 11th house. Imagine a situation where you have done something, received a response from society, and really reached the place indicated by the 11th house. This is the place on the pedestal, the place where you perform, where you are seen by people whom you do not personally know, who react to you. And if you stay there for a long time in this house and you do not go to the next stage, to the 12th house, then here is the danger to slide back into the 5th house, as in a game that consists of fields and chips. So you probably know such board games like Monopoly. When you get to a certain field and there is a sign, go back. And if you have some kind of a dysfunction, some kind of a weakness in the 11th house, you will immediately roll back along the 1-7 axis, along the axis exactly to the opposite house, into the 5th. And you will have to renew your education, you will have to learn to represent yourself somehow in a new way, and so on. And there are two ways how you can be brought into the 11th house, to your great income, recognition and fame. This is the path either through the 10th house, which of course is also far from the Lagna, from the point from which we begin to move. This is when you are already a professional in your field and decide to add a new meaning to your activity, thus scaling your activity to suit all people, the whole community. Then your income will sharply increase because you become interesting to many. Because there is always a Rahu indicator there, in the 11th house, crossing borders, and your activity begins to actively expand and you receive these incomes. Women with the highlighted 11th house in the chart often ask me a question: where is my income and where is the promised Dana Yoga? A combination of prosperity, for example, when the 11th house is associated with the 2nd house in the chart, why I still have no money? And I have a very simple question for them. Do you work? Do you do anything for society that can be scaled up? If yes, then it is very easy to work with you. I can tell you exactly how, through what parameters you need to make one small step to the 11th house, and everything will go very, very quickly for you. But as a rule, If this is a woman who, in general, does not see herself in the profession, she does not assign herself a particular role there, but in order to develop through relationships, she is engaged in children, housekeeping, husband, looking after her family, and so on, it is impossible to tell her something. It is impossible to come up with a strategy because there's no place from which we will push off to make this step from the 10th to the 11th house. It is clear that in this case, Saturn is not worked out. In principle, a person does not do anything socially useful, bright. This is the one answer to the question why I still have no money when I have such highlighted 11th house in my chart. The second reason is the person's personal creativity, 5th house. The 5th house is always a stepping stone on which the potential for the 11th house grows. It is a base for realization of the 11th house. If you are nothing intellectually or as a person, then there is nothing to do in the 11th house. There is a shame there waiting for you, undeserved glory. For example, why do children who become very popular very early abruptly slide down in life and may even end up very bad? For example, get carried away with drugs, get carried away with some chemicals that supposedly expand their consciousness, support their self-esteem. Because they did not go through the preceding stages, because in fact the 5th house has not been worked out. They do not stand firmly on earth as individuals, realized individuals with their own intellectual potential, which is unique. And this uniqueness, it is worked out in the 5th house. And until it is worked out, it is too early to go for fame, big money and income in the 11th house. And we must tell the same to women who often come to consultations and ask about their income, who ask what they should do in order to get big money, income. You must first work out the 5th house, and for a woman this is often children. You need to give birth to them first, raise them, and then somewhere closer to the second half of your life you can take care of the 11th house, because after the birth of a child, routine will drag you into the 6th house anyway. The 6th and the 11th house are incompatible areas of life. Or rather, they're difficult to combine, but in some cases people need to combine them necessarily, because their 6th and 11th houses are connected in their charts, but in principle, this is incompatible laborious service in the 6th house and the struggle with routine duties. The allocation of small everyday tasks does not in any way combine with the parameters of the 11th house, where large-scale projects are already available to us. And the solution of these problems, the issues of the 11th house, raise our fame and status in society more and more, but this also needs to be kept in mind. And the next question which we can also consider on this canvas of life, on a sequence of 12 equivalent fields, from where we can generally get claims to resources and money. Of course, it begins in the 2nd house of the horoscope. The 2nd house is the house of self-esteem, resources. This is the house of basic needs. And if a person has a well-developed 2nd house, then in principle, he always feels worthy of a resource and worthy to take an adequate price for his service. And in order to generally come to a profession, some kind of a realization in a society, the 2nd house is the basis, because the 2nd house forms a trine to the 10th. All houses that form a trine to the 10th, and these are the 2nd and the 6th houses, are very important in order to go out to the public, into society with your needs and capabilities and start to work. And then you can go after your big income in the 11th house. And when people ask a question, maybe I should change my activity and do something else in order to get a lot of money there, then everything is wrong here. Wrong in thinking, in sequence. To get big money, First, you need to have a strong second house, good self-esteem, understanding of your needs. Why do you need this big money in general? To maintain what? What are they needed for? What are your personal needs? Also, what are the needs of your family? Because someone who has a strong second house knows how to redistribute resources in his informational field and in his environment. And he knows not only how to save resources, but also how to provide resources to other people. And therefore, some people really need a lot of money because they, for example, have a big family, or they have a community of people whom they feed, support, nourish, and these are people with a strong second house. Next is the sixth house. The sixth house assumes that we must learn to highlight tasks and see our enemies in the face, enemies in a very expanded meaning. These are all troubles, all the problems that can arise around us, and we first need to fix them somehow, voice them out. Mercury helps a lot in this house, in the sixth house. It helps to voice out the problems, to highlight tasks, and this is the same basis for a profession, a basis for social activities. If you cannot see the task and do not even voice it out and do not know how to behave in the conflict, so that it is productive and useful to all parties in the conflict, then you're not a professional. In order to enter the profession, you must also have a strong sixth house, and when you have already done this, you can go straight to the 10th and work, work and work. Develop practice, develop that base, based on which you will find something unique that will lead you to the 11th. For example, you opened your private practice of counseling, for example, psychological counseling. For a psychologist, you first need to pass through yourself a lot of cases, a lot of people, a lot of tasks. Try to solve them somehow in different ways, and only then you can write a book, invent a technique that you can scale in the 11th house. Do you see how long the way to the 11th house is? If you come in for a consultation and ask a question what to do in order to get everything at once, then it will not work right away. You will need to invest very much time, resources in the beginning of this new activity. It is always unprofitable to start a new activity, and therefore I always ask, do you really want to forget everything that you knew and have worked out so far and switch to something else? Let's say a person says, I no longer want to work as an accountant in a bank, as a financier. I am interested in esoteric sciences, and I really think I should do this, astrology or something else. Some kind of science that presupposes already less defined framework, more creativity. Or maybe I can generally go into such an area where you don't need to make any effort. To some kind of creative field where everything is spontaneous. Nothing will work. I must disappoint you, because if you have not achieved success in the activity that you have been doing for a very long time, then you most likely will not achieve success in this new activity that you are about to start. Only if you succeeded in transferring your skills from one area to another so beautifully and correctly, without losing any skills, and it is not easy to do, you need to be able to transfer what you have developed, for example, in a bank, in a financial sector, into creativity. If you can do it, it is great, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult to make such a transition. And as a rule, a person needs to invest a lot if he wants to change his occupation. It takes at least 5 years, because first you need to learn a lot, so that you're not being ashamed. Take something, some income in the 11th house, and your 5th house needs to be worked out. Second, you need to practice in the 10th house, in the 6th and the 10th houses. The 6th house assumes that people with problems will come to you. You solve them, And you yourself might feel shame, guilt for saying something wrong or not doing something. Just the same feelings you had at your accounting job, if it was your occupation. You will have to go the same path. You will, of course, go a little faster, or maybe not a little, very much faster, because you already have a well-developed system for responding to a problem. And let's say this system is effective and working good, but still you need to get practice. So, 2 years, 3 years of practice, and only then you will reach a more or less normal income. But sometimes this path turns out to be justifiable. This can be advised to a person when his moral values that have been brought up during his life already do not correspond to the work, the social mission that he performs. Very often such people come to consultations with such requests. I can no longer do my work because it suggests that I need to deceive people. If it sounds like this, then of course the person has developed a Jupiter level. That is, he already understands that his work is either petty or connected with some kind of a self-interest, profit, and he wants to go to another Jupiterian level. And this is absolutely normal. He wants his activity to correspond to the norms of society, so that he will fall asleep after his working day calmly, with a sense of satisfaction that he did not deceive anyone, that people really are in need of what he does. Although the work that is connected with the same commerce and sometimes deception, for example in sales, someone is trying to sell something to someone that this person does not really need, this is also the necessary level. It cannot be denied. You cannot blame yourself very much for this, that you did this and so on. You need to accept it, and by accepting it, you are taking this to a next level. In this case, yes, it is worth to invest in a new kind of activity. But as a rule, people should not change their occupation in order to receive large incomes. These things are not related. On the contrary, changing the occupation will throw you back in time and space from achieving a result. If your result, your desire, is to get more money from work, therefore you need to do the same thing that you did. Only introduce new meanings and organize your activities in a new way. And you can organize your activities in a new way only when you organize your thinking in a new way. And now I will tell you exactly how you need to organize your thinking, so that you can transform and bring your current activity to the next level, into the 11th house, that is, from the 10th to 11th house. What is necessary to do this? Now I will talk about the methods of developing your activity, especially for such people who are already doing something, perhaps at an amateur level. These are, of course, the majority of people who watch my videos and come to my courses, consultations. These are people who are already interested in something, they're already busy in society, and whatever they do, maybe some kind of small consulting practice, or say teaching dance, teaching yoga, or running some beauty blog and so on. These are people who already do something in the 10th house. What they need to keep in mind in order to scale their activities, and in order to make this leap from the 10th to the 11th house and be worthy of income, to understand everything, and to set a good price for their services, and does not feel guilt or shame for what they're doing. What aspects of consciousness need to be paid attention to? I will start with what is Dana Yoga in a horoscope. Dana Yoga is the yoga of prosperity, which assumes that a person will be rich. And we have the classic Dana Yogas. The most classic of them is the connection of the 2nd house with the 11th house. The 2nd house is the house of money, and the 11th is also the house of money. And people who have such a connection are considered rich people. But this is far from the case. And why? You can answer this question at the end of this video. For example, why not all ascending Leos are automatically rich? Because they all have 2nd and 11th houses in the horoscope connected by one planet, Mercury. the planets of commerce and monetary gain. The ability to crank up some fraud, quickly make money, nevertheless, for some reason many ascending Leos sit without money and without any significant income. Why does it happen? The 2nd and the 11th houses of the horoscope, which grahas connect them? Which planets? In the natural zodiac, the ruler of the 2nd house is Venus, and very importantly, it is also the ruler of the 7th house. And the 2nd planet is Saturn. Saturn is the ruler of the 11th house and the ruler of the 10th house, which is very important. And when we do this castling between the 11th and the 2nd houses, we must remember all the time about Venus and Saturn and carefully analyze them in the chart. But then there is an opinion that the chart works by itself without native's effort. And often people look at their charts in bewilderment and say, why don't I have what is promised here? The answer is very simple, because you did not do anything for this. Because in order for something to work, you must first realize it. And the more we realize, the more we reveal the potential of a certain positions that indicate something to us. There are many yogas in the chart of each person. Generally, yoga is a connection, and these connections are constantly working in a person's consciousness. And when these connections are realized, they become as effective as possible, and you can use them consciously. And of course, a person who saw a connection between the 2nd and the 11th houses in his chart can consciously use these connections. But what should be worked out first? Venus is a channel of communication with people. If you build communication with people in a healthy way, if you do not disrupt energy exchange, do not fool anyone, and clearly understand what you take from relationships and what you give in relationships with other people, it is all great. From this side, Dana Yoga will work for you. Because, as I said, Venus rules not only the 2nd house, your self-esteem, the ability to see your needs, enjoy, receive satisfaction, but also it is contact. Contact with the environment, the 7th house, which is the 2nd house of the profession. This is the 10th house from the 10th, and exactly here, the sign of Venus, the significator of the profession and the ruler of the 10th and the 11th houses, Saturn, is exalted. Therefore, if you do not know how to build relationships, and if it seems like everything is fine with you but there is no money, then most likely this is the relationships level. And first of all, it primarily depends on how you communicate with other people. For example, a person comes for a consultation and then he takes the money back. What is his level of relationships with other people? He took another person's time, resource, efforts. He also took a place of another person who could have been at this consultation instead of him. In every psychological and astrological practice, people with such concepts come. And of course, this is a great sign of poverty of consciousness, because a person with the help of Venus has already violated many laws. That is, he has exhausted the energy of another person and space in general, took someone's place, and if it is an organization, then there must have been a lot of people already engaged in this person. He came to you through the secretary was working with him, and in the end he took everything back to himself, fully using the resource he wanted to take. Here was such an example of a violation of energy exchange, and many people actually do not notice what they're doing. And then they come for a consultation and ask why they cannot increase their income level, because their level of communication with other people is not very high. There is no clear understanding of where the boundaries of communication are, where you need to stop, and how not to waste the time of another person who trusts you. and wants to tell you something and wants to give something, be useful, how not to use it in vain. Because if you heard something from a person who really wanted to reach you, for instance, at the same consultation, you are obliged to take some seed out of this and use it further, and so on. There are a lot of laws like this, such hidden rocks that no one sees and does not take into account. But a person who really has money, has income, he sees all this, he knows all this. Resourceful state consciousness is very different from the consciousness of a non-resourceful person. This is according to Venus. And then Saturn is the second force, the second planet, which organizes our thinking, capable of making money, capable of taking income. And the point is not to cash in on someone and take some other people's money that does not belong to you, because the money is in fact someone else's. We only need it temporarily to solve our problems. And here Saturn comes to the front. Why do you need these large incomes in general? For what tasks? What are you going to restructure in society? And what are you going to bring here with the help of these energies? The flow of these energies into your life, because money is energy. What are you going to do and how you are going to replan, restructure the space for which you have taken responsibility. It is very important for Saturn whether you know how to take responsibility for the space that you manage. This is about the development of the skill to think strategically, to push your personal needs to the background a little and concentrate on social needs, social benefits. This is what Saturn teaches us. If you know how to do this, then you can very quickly come to big money, and you should remember they impose responsibility on you. And we talked about the 12th house of the horoscope as a house that goes further. This is the last stage of evolution and the last stage of the manifestation of our consciousness here. And in fact, we cannot stop in the 11th house. As soon as you get large resources for yourself, your task immediately becomes to give them away. And by taking and giving away, not to violate laws, universal laws, and it is very difficult, this is a big responsibility. So if you're not getting a lot of money, big resources into your hands at the moment, that is because deep inside you understand that you can fall flat on the face. And then you cannot calmly cleanse yourself in the 12th house. You will not fall asleep soundly. The 12th house is the stage that allows us to fall asleep calmly. If a person has accumulated a huge potential for himself, he understands that he can already perform not only accounting work, but do something more. Then he is very eager to go to the 11th house. This is the impulse from the 5th house. I understood my individuality and I understood my purpose. I see the potential. I want this. Then I go consistently to the 6th house, learn to interact with the environment in conflict, learn to highlight tasks, solve the problems of other people. Then in the 7th, I build higher relationships with people, already taking into account all the levels of energy exchange. I understand everything, what is my value, what is the value of another person, and how to interact correctly so that we're all pleased. Then I go into transformation in the 8th house, I receive new knowledge in the 9th, I am asserting as a person of a higher order, and only then I go to the 10th house and develop practice, disinterestedly serving humanity on some social level, sometimes renouncing the personal needs and sacrificing the parameters of the 4th house, house of comfort, home, family, and I'm constantly at work. And only then I end up in the 11th house, where, as a very responsible person, I receive a lot of money, a lot of assets for its redistribution in this society system. If you want large incomes, such a task is imposed on you. And the spaces will give you this money if you really do not have large disruptions of energy exchange with other people. That is, according to Venus, you are definitely aware of your needs in the 2nd house. Keep your self-esteem at a high level, you don't become a victim, and so on. then everything is fine with Venus. And you know how to communicate with people so that it would be good and beneficial for both parties. And the second point is Saturn. When you put social needs above personal ones, when you already have some strategies that exceeds the needs of one person only, and you are ready to go to the work and promote some projects. And in order to fall asleep calmly, as we talked about the Jupiterian level, it certainly helps us to fall asleep calmly in the 12th house. This is the house of Jupiter. We mustn't violate the moral code, to not overstep through some values, to afterwards in the 12th house we were calm, so that we would not slide in shame into the 5th house, into the Trikona, where we would feel very bad, ashamed, and where we would have to learn again to represent ourselves somehow new, to re-educate, to develop your life to a certain level, to develop your awareness again, to be sure that you really deserve income, deserve some kind of fame, recognition in society. This is the 5th house. This is also the house of Purva Punya, and if a person's 5th house is connected with the 11th, for example, the Lord of the 5th is in the 11th house. In this situation, the person already receives his education with benefit. That is, he picks such an education which, as it seems to him at that moment, will lead him to some kind of a status in society. This may be a delusion, of course, because society itself is constantly changing. For example, in the 90s, legal education was very popular and everyone wanted to be economists and lawyers. And the first who studied there were people whose ruler of the 5th house is in the 11th, because such people need education in order to lead them to some kind of a status in society. This can be an error from the point of view of the whole cycle. And for example, people who learn with the position of the 5th house's lord in the 12th, at the end of the day, they will fall asleep more calmly than those who learn with the motive of ruler of the 5th house in the 11th. They only concentrate on what is lucrative and profitable. But here I stepped aside a little. Let's return to our topic and recall the question we started with. It was the question of what to do, where to work and how to work, what activities to develop in order to receive a lot of money and great income. I will note again that this is not connected, and you can take any activity that you are more or less adapted for, and most likely you will have already chosen this activity based on the parameters of your horoscope. I can explain to you why you chose it. For example, if you have the moon in such and such sign, then every day you tend to do such and such things, and think about this. Your consciousness, your psychic energy is directed to these things. This is the moon in the horoscope. And here, by the way, a very important point. You can read on the internet where you can get money from. The simplest, uncomplicated advice that any astrologer who has just begun to study or who has not yet gained a lot of practice gives you, he would look at your 11th house, will look at the ruler of the 11th and tell you to deal with real estate because the ruler of the 11th house is in the 4th in your chart. And you can receive income from the real estate, from the property, from your mother. He will list you the parameters of the 4th house and you can only say, why don't I do it? Why am I still not a broker, not a real estate agent? Why don't I earn my millions by selling houses? And the answer is very simple, because the astrologer did not start to analyze your chart with the moon. And the moon shows what you will do every day. Venus shows how you will communicate with people and your sphere of potential clients. And Saturn shows how you discipline yourself and what you consider to be your biggest flaw in life, and on what you're going to work the most. And the chain Moon, Venus, Saturn will lead you to activity. It may not be real estate at all. There may be something completely different there. The owner of the 11th house in the 4th simply conditions you, and your 4th house, for example, you need to have some benefit in the parameters of the fourth house. If you need to sell a house or settle in profitably, exchange an apartment, buy land, then you will do it profitably. But it will not be the kind of money that will provide you all your life. You will just do it profitably. You will simply be able, for example, use the media to advertise your house when you put it up for sale. It's super, it's great, but it's not a source of your day-to-day income because the moon shows the day-to-day activities. And if in the chart of a person the owner of the 11th and the owner of the 10th houses are not at all connected, that is, they stand somewhere in different places, do not mutually aspect each other, not in the same house, and for example on the 2-12 axes, one is in one house and the other is on an adjoining house, what will you do? How will you advise such a person to make money? Because you remember that money in the 11th house is a consequence of activity and not a consequence of the fact that I accidentally inherited a garage from my dad. And some astrologers might say, well, here is your income and here is a garage from your dad, or a one-bedroom apartment from your mom, or a house in a village. This can happen when a person, for example, has Jupiter as the owner of the 11th and the 4th house and also the owner of the 8th. And therefore, in this case, there may be an inheritance from relatives, grandmothers, grandfathers, and so on, but this is not a source of income for a person. Therefore, this question is much more complicated, and if you want to really understand all these nuances of astrology, then you need to learn and practice. I mentioned here the chain Moon, Venus, Saturn. This is exactly the chain of forces that lead us to the profession. There is also a second chain and also leads us into the profession. This is the Moon, Mars, Saturn chain. And it all comes down to Saturn, which is the significator of the profession. But we go there in different ways. First we look at what interests us, what we in general do every day, what we focus on. Then we look at how we either build contacts with the environment through Venus or simply act through Mars, our life strategies, how our will manifests itself in general. And this is shown by Mars in a horoscope, and then everything comes to Saturn. If you first analyze this, then you will not give a person impractical advice. You will not use his time for consultations in vain to tell him a completely banal thing that he can read on the internet. Look at the owner of his 11th house and after, build it into what you saw initially about his activities in his chart. And when you asked about income, super profits in the 11th house, big money, you need to return a person to his profession. And let's summarize how to get big incomes and why we need it. Firstly, we understand that big income is a consequence of work and a consequence of social purpose, which we're fully aware of and are ready to go to a new stage, a new level. We are ready to accept the conditions of the system. Rejecting one job or one status, we go to a new one. Here I will say a few more words about what the sign of Aquarius is, and the fact that the sign of Aquarius contains a few parameters of Shrapit Yoga. This is a combination of Saturn and Rahu. On the one hand, if we want big incomes, we must work out our Saturn. And on the other hand, we must understand that there must be our personal ambition in that we want big incomes, a higher salary, bigger assets in our life. There should be a Rahu influence there. This is completely normal, despite the fact that this house is considered as an evil house, and the house is the evilest house in the Trishodaya group. That is, these are the houses that generally destroy our spiritual essence and distract us from spiritual tasks that leads us to moksha. Yes, this is a very evil house from this point of view because, as we have already said, you can stop there, get stuck, and being in this house prematurely threatens us with the destruction of our personality, because Rahu will do its job. But what is Rahu in another sense? Rahu is that ambition that lives inside of each person and is conditioned by his generic context. The fact that he must advance his clan as a system to a new level and do something that his ancestors, relatives, and this whole system supported from Ketu's side could not do. And he wants to do it, and he wants to break through somewhere. And by the way, sometimes a person realizes a desire of his own clan, but not his own. We talked about it on the course that we recently had on the study of the family. That our desire is often conditioned by the desire of our ancestors. For example, to get an education that the maternal grandfather did not receive. It is embedded in us literally with mother's milk, or with the food that we consume in the second house. In general, all those values that come to us from the ancestral environment, and it happens that we definitely need to realize. And realization is in fact the key to liberation, because if you have not realized this on a material plane, then it will hang somewhere and you will consider yourself a failure. Or the family will say this, not even directly but indirectly arguing, after all you did not manage to achieve something in this life. Therefore, those who aspire to the 11th house have every right to strive there. This is one of the stages of evolution, consciousness, development of life, and there is nothing wrong with it, nothing criminal, as supporters of spiritual development claim, because spiritual development can only be on the basis of what you have received, on the basis of realized karma. And there is always a trail from Rahu in the 11th house. And there are ambitions that are inherent not only in you, but also in your ancestors. And your task is to climb a step and realize these desires at least a little. To do this, you need to fully satisfy Saturn. This is exactly what is associated with Tripit Yoga. And people who have this conjunction in their charts, they are just trying, on the one hand, to satisfy all the needs of the system and not go beyond it through Saturn. And then, on the other hand, at some time, their ambition exceeds their caution. They begin to stick out very brightly in life, and this is precisely the meaning of the Aquarius sign, the meaning of the 11th house, which is about income and big profits, about bonuses. Therefore, you can safely go there. And let us recall the key rules that are related to how to transfer our activities into scale. Firstly, you need to step over the personal to learn to control yourself during the day. Not to be too relaxed, I mean, not allow the others to do anything to you, and be able to say no. To be able to accept no from other people, to clearly understand the laws of systems. And only then you can reach a new level by inventing your own system. Because it is impossible to invent your own system without going through practice in many other systems of life. You will just be destroyed by Rahu, which is very malicious, dangerous, and plunge a person into excesses, drugs, and so on, to those areas where consciousness expands quickly, but not due to the person's own efforts and not due to well-developed systematics in life. If you want to study more deeply the topic of how to come to a profession in general, starting with the moon, and in fact this video is not about super profits, but how to get it, and you can get it only through real, meaningful application in society. And if you want to start with the moon and see your developmental chains, then you can take the course Moon, Cognitive Astrology, Moon and Brain. I will leave a link under this video to this course, which I recently did. It is a basic level, which did not really turn out as basic. I introduced a lot of new concepts there, including Bhava Chalita. You can take this course, it is an extension of our basic module, and it explains how consciousness, human thinking works, and how through the grahas we analyze the development of a person in any sphere, starting from the moon. Here I would like to finish. Thank you very much for your attention. Leave your comments under this video. I will read them and perhaps answer some of them. If you want, you can suggest a topic for the next broadcasts, and I will hope to do them more often. See you soon.